iRacing is the most serious simulator out there. If you compare it to every other sim, it has the most competitive scene among any of them. And it's not only arguably the most realistic sim, but way more importantly, it's the most consistent. But even with iRacing being held up to this really high standard, it isn't even close to being perfect. Just like anything else replicating reality, no matter how close it represents it, there's always somewhere it's lacking, and there's always room for improvement. Obviously, with a simulator to this caliber, it's a lot easier said than done to just improve these things that I'm about to talk to you about. So in this video, I'm going to go over a list of things that iRacing could improve, but I'm also going to talk about the possible reasons iRacing hasn't done it yet. This list includes a lot of very well-known issues within iRacing, but on the other end, it includes some very minor things that no one really thinks about, but it would make iRacing so much better. And I'm going to talk about it all. And obviously the biggest thing that I'm sure everyone was expecting to hear is netcode. Netcode is basically how the sim handles communication between all of the drivers' computers to the iRacing servers. Specifically, netcode handles predicting and syncing where all the cars on track are in real time. This is just the actual definition of netcode though, but 99% of the time you hear the word netcode, they're really just talking about this. This is what happens when iRacing has even a tiny lapse in connection between the servers and a driver, and it's kind of a big deal. iRacing is a simulator built on competition and close racing, and when things like this happen, it's not a good look to the people driving it. You could be completely clear from making contact with another driver, but iRacing's server can still detect your position on track as a car contact, and it ruins races on a pretty regular basis for a lot of drivers. The reason this is a really big problem on mainly just iRacing and not other sims is actually really interesting though, and it kind of justifies why it exists on iRacing. You see, on other simulators, when you're driving online, you might notice that if you compare how a car moves to how it moves on iRacing, the other sims just look completely unnatural, and the car kind of laterally just skips around all over the place. This doesn't just make it scary to go side by side, but it also just looks completely unrealistic. It makes the sim look less like a sim and more like one of those racing games you play at the arcade. The reason other sims do this and iRacing doesn't is because of the way iRacing built their netcode, and it all has to do with ping. Ping is the round-trip connection between your computer to the multiplayer servers you're connected to, and it's measured in the milliseconds it takes for the server to receive a singular ping of updated connection from your computer. And naturally, the connection between user and server can never be a perfect 0 milliseconds. Every input that you give your computer has to be communicated over to the servers, and in racing sims, there's a lot of very meticulous inputs that are literally being changed every single millisecond. So if you're in a session with other drivers and your ping is even only just 50 milliseconds, any inputs within those 50 milliseconds aren't updated until the next ping is sent to the server. This is what causes those choppy looking movements in other sims, but even if you have what's considered a bad ping of 200 milliseconds on iRacing, how can it possibly look this smooth and realistic? That's where iRacing's netcode takes action. What iRacing does to fix the problem is, instead of showing you the raw position of exactly where the user is, iRacing will completely eliminate those 50 milliseconds of lost positioning data and predict where the car is. This prediction visually makes every driver in iRacing appear to just have 0 ping, but the obvious drawback is this. Sometimes iRacing will predict a car's position visually in one place, but physically in another. And sometimes, even though visually you look like you are just casually driving side by side, the server recognizes a contact and kills you. Now, in my opinion, I would much rather have netcode collisions instead of choppy, unrealistic looking car mechanics. But is there anything iRacing can do to stop the netcode collisions while also keeping the visual latency low? The short answer is probably, but there's always going to be trade-offs to every solution. So the unfortunate truth is, even though this is a big issue, for the time being, we kind of just have to deal with it. I'm very grateful to say that recently I've been able to dip the very tips of my toes in the world of real-life racing. And I can't even put into words how surreal it is to be able to walk on a track in real life that I've literally driven thousands upon thousands of laps on in iRacing. Comparing all of the very tiny details from sim to reality, there's almost nothing different between the way the track looks and feels. But there is just this one thing that bugs me so much. And it's this. This is a picture I took while I was doing a track walk at Virginia International Raceway. You probably don't even know what I'm talking about by just looking at the picture, so let me zoom in and see if you can notice. Can you see it yet? See that dip in the dirt next to the curb? That isn't in iRacing. Now, hear me out, because you're probably thinking I'm literally out of my mind for being pissed about iRacing not including a tiny dip in the dirt. But this small detail that most tracks have is a really big deal. This is referred to as curb drop-off, and it's basically a big dip in the dirt on the outside of a curb or even just the track surface where drivers overutilize the track. It's very similar to a desire path, where people just ignore the already paved path and create their own because it's quicker. Sometimes drivers overuse the track limits and run into the dirt either by accident or on purpose to cut a corner and gain just that tiny bit of more time. But unlike a desire path, curb drop-off at a certain point starts to become dangerous. This is a clip from late last year when me and Aiden were doing another track walk of the Patriot course at VIR.
Just be careful when you get here. You can see how many people try and cut the corner because it makes it feel faster, but you have to be aware if you go back on the track, this is a big wheel wrecker. We don't want to have to replace a bunch of bent rims and blown out tires.
Now, the video doesn't really do it justice, and in this case, the curb drop-off wasn't really that crazy in this specific corner, but look at this. This is a clip from the recent Sebring 12 Hours showing how the curb drop-off evolved through the early hours of the race.
5 or 6 inches deep, and you know that it's going to catch somebody out. You get out there now, the car's going to be bottoming out, and it's going to be tricky.
Look at that.
Very tricky. But, you know, you've got to drive within the limits. And that's certainly now drivers getting in the car, they're going to have to be working with that. That's part of the deal.
Now, most simple creatures like me that only drive the sim wouldn't think too much about curb drop-off. It's not a big thing in sim racing, but after walking the track in real life and hearing real drivers' thoughts on the matter, it really is a big deal. I mean, in real life, if you dip your tires into that curb drop-off and it's deep enough, you can bend a rim, bottom out your car and damage the underbody, or even just upset the car enough to spin out completely. On most tracks in iRacing, it's literally quicker to dip your tires completely over a curb and into the grass so you can utilize the entire track limits, which, for this reason, is completely unrealistic. And yes, I know this is a detail that isn't really a fundamental issue within iRacing, but iRacing is a simulator that's renowned for their realistic track models that are laser scanned to legit be one-to-one. And I can vouch that every other detail about their tracks is perfect, but they missed out on one of the biggest factors that drivers have to take into account in real life. And to be honest, I don't exactly know why. iRacing is also very well known for its special event endurance races that are scheduled to be based around the real life events, like the Sebring 12, Daytona 24, and so on. But there is one major key difference between the real life races and iRacing's. This is the final lap of the 2026 Daytona 24. The gap from the overall leader to second place is just under 2 seconds. Imagine a 24-hour race with just under 1,000 laps, and the racing is still this close at the front. Now, let's compare it to the iRacing version. This is the end of the 2023 iRacing Daytona 24, and the gap between the second and first place cars is only around 30 seconds, which isn't too bad after 24 hours of racing, but you'll notice almost everyone else is just completely out of the race. When drivers and teams have an incident, the race is just over for them. Any mistake is punished and can't be realistically made up, and the problem just gets worse the lower split you're racing in. It's literally just boring. I mean, you spend hours upon hours prepping for this race, then you actually get into it and just drive hot laps for 23 hours. You had to turn down any plans you had for the weekend because you wanted to drive this race. But then when you're sitting there during your 3 AM stint with literally no cars around you, it's kind of hard not to regret joining in the race because it just feels like a waste of time. It's rare to actually find an endurance event that actually turns out to have good racing all the way through, and the problem is literally just sitting there in plain sight. Safety cars. Why doesn't iRacing just add safety cars to bring the field back together and make things more interesting? Well, it's kind of easier said than done. I made a video about iRacing's biggest controversies, and in that video I explain a bunch of exploits that have been used in iRacing. And the simplest reason iRacing doesn't add safety cars is because of that. Not because of the video, but because it would be exploited. Like, a lot. Just think about it. If iRacing added safety cars and made them operate the same as they do in real life, a safety car would be deployed during every major wreck, and for starters, that happens way more often in iRacing than it does in real life. There would be safety cars left and right, and the races would go from being boring because there's no safety cars to being boring because there's too many safety cars. Also, drivers who have 2 or more teams driving in the same race could just use each other to cause safety cars at the perfect moment right before a pit window. This would be a major exploit used not only in top splits, but just in every split. Now, there's a simple solution to both of those problems. Just make the deployment of the safety cars random intervals throughout the race. And honestly, I think this could be a really good alternative. Through an entire endurance event, if we leave the deployment random, it adds the unpredictability real-life races have. Maybe iRacing could make it to where there's no safety cars during the first and the last 30 minutes to keep green flag racing where it's most important. But everything in between could be a deployment from anywhere to just no safety cars at all, up to a respectable random number. But they would have to truly make it random for this to feel authentic. But iRacing's core is built around skill-based results, and I just don't think everyone would be happy with endurance events that have a sense of RNG to them, even though if that's what real-life racing is like. For now though, from what I can gather at least, iRacing is looking into a solution for endurance events, but unfortunately it's going to be a lot more complicated than just slapping in some safety cars. This is a crash. And this is also a crash. Yeah, not much more needs to be said on that front. No, but for real, the last item on this list I need to talk about is the damage model. Every racing sim from iRacing all the way to Indianapolis 500, the simulation, has a terrible damage model. There is no racing simulator that actually has a realistic looking crash. The reason is obviously just performance. I mean, in a racing simulator, you aren't really supposed to be crashing, you're supposed to be racing. So it is understandable why racing sims don't really put too much effort into making crashes look ultra realistic. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. iRacing's problem specifically when it comes to damage goes a little deeper than it looks. For starters, tire barriers in real life are literally designed to be a softer surface for hard impacts and absorb insane amounts of energy to slow down a crashing car a lot more smooth. They're also really good at stopping a car without having it bounce or drift back onto track, because the safest place a car can be crashed is to be off the racing surface. On iRacing, tire barriers not only are hard as a rock, but they're actually pretty similar to a trampoline. If you hit one head on, you just bounce directly back onto track. You can kind of see how this is a real problem, and to be honest, I don't know the specifics on why iRacing hasn't fixed it yet. Another big thing is the way the cars behave when they have damage, more specifically body damage. In real racing, there have been multiple instances of cars just racing around with completely messed up body panels, yet they still have the pace to battle for position. But this damage on iRacing will lose you up to a second a lap because of aero performance. Even if we take into account that maybe the visual damage may not be accurate to how hard of a hit the car took, this incident resulted in a meatball? It happens all the time where a light graze against the wall or even just bump drafting can give you damage that completely takes you out of the competition. This also kind of goes back to netcode. I think one of the reasons for this damage model is because even though visually it may have looked like you barely made that contact, iRacing's internals recognized that it was a way bigger hit than you actually saw, but this doesn't explain though how inconsistent the damage model is from car to car. I've personally had multiple occasions where I was driving a car and lightly grazed a wall and literally nothing happened, but in another car an entire bumper just falls off. The incident points also are pretty inconsistent from car to car. For example, in the Porsche Cup 992.1, sometimes a light tap can be turned into a 4x contact, but in a very similar Porsche Cup 992.2, it takes much harder of a hit in order to get that same 4x contact, allowing for much harder racing. Certain other cars vary even more than this example, but I can't explain all of the differences. So to summarize, it's just very inconsistent. This normally wouldn't be too big of a problem, but like I've said before, iRacing is a simulator built on competition and race results. So with inconsistencies like this that sometimes just make no sense, it becomes a pretty big problem. A lot of these issues stem really deep into how iRacing was originally built. I mean, you have to cut some slack for a simulator that is still stuck on running an engine built in 2008. There's a lot of issues that are just really difficult to solve because in order to solve them, you would have to change the entire foundation of the sim, which sometimes just isn't really possible. All of the issues I mentioned aren't just completely ignored by iRacing either. iRacing is honestly doing an amazing job of working closer and closer to a more perfect running sim, and I didn't make this video to shame them, even if at some points it sounded like I was. Eventually we are going to see improvements in netcode collisions, some sort of improvement to endurance racing, and hopefully improvements in the damage model. But I haven't heard anything on curb drop-off from iRacing, and iRacing, if you're listening, please, for my sake, add curb drop-off, please.